Hey everyone, this is Brown at I Have Brown, and today we are going to be talking about the movie Nemesis on Blu-ray. So Nemesis was a sci-fi action movie that came out in 1992, and it was directed by Albert Pyun, and it was written by a woman named Rebecca Charles. But in an odd twist of fate, Rebecca Charles was actually Albert Pyun writing under a different name. But Nemesis is a movie that I would call a fascinating failure because it's very amateurish in terms of, say, production values and plot development, but there are some genuinely cool things that stand out within this movie that make it more memorable than it would be otherwise. And not to the point of, say, elevating a Nemesis to a wholly worthwhile movie, but more to the point of, say, making the viewer wonder, how would Nemesis have been had, say, someone with more writing and directing experience handled the movie? But the folks at MVD did a very good job of re-releasing this movie on Blu-ray, and they kind of make it their stock in trade to re-release, say, hard-to-find cult classics, mainly from the 90s, on Blu-ray. One of my more recent reviews was for the 1997 movie Drive with Mark Dacascos. That was one of MVD's releases on Blu-ray, and that was a really cool movie and a really well done release as far as Blu-rays go. And so in this case, Nemesis is not a good movie, but the Blu-ray release it was a very good one. It's very polished as far as what's on screen, and there are several bonus features that, if you're a fan of the movie, you should definitely check the Blu-ray out, because the bonus features, you get a lot behind the scenes material, so you kind of understand what the movie was originally going to be versus how it originally turned out, how it ended up turning out. And so it's interesting in that regard. But Nemesis takes place in the year 2027, in which there's this sort of ongoing war between humans and cyborgs, to a point of, say, cyborgs are becoming a lot more commonplace, and humanity is finding it harder to, say, stay atop of the food chain. And caught in the middle of all this is a police officer named Alex Rain, who himself is a cyborg, but tends to go up against other cyborgs in his missions. And unfortunately, his latest mission has him nearly destroyed to a point where he has to be rebuilt. And he ends up leaving the force because, he's having a sort of crisis of identity. He doesn't know if he's, human or if he's a full-on machine anymore. I mean, yes, he's aware that he's a cyborg, but the amount of replacements that he's had for his organic parts, they're making him question, what if he's a traitor of some sort, like, is he a machine hunting his own kind, so on and so forth. But he leaves the force and goes off the grid, but he's tracked down by some old friends of his. And first is his former colleague and lover, Jared, who initially tries to get him to get back into the swing of things, but he turns her down. But then his old boss, Commissioner Farnsworth, tracks him down and forces him to go on one last assignment. It turns out that the reason Farnsworth had brought Alex back in was because Jared had gone rogue, and she is in fact taking information to a group of terrorists who want to execute the diplomatic leaders of both the United States and Japan, who in fact are going to be meeting in Hawaii to form an economic merger. And so, once Farnsworth and his people get Alex Rain apprised of the situation, Alex initially refuses them, but as forced incentive, they put a bomb in his heart. And once it counts down before he completes his mission, he dies. And so, with no choice, he sets out to find Jared and most likely kill her. But once he goes on this mission, he eventually comes to realize that there's a lot more going on in this picture than initially thought, and the war between humans and cyborgs is going to get a lot more complicated. So that's the basic gist of the movie, and it's one of those things where you could tell there's a lot of stuff going on plot-wise, but the way it's executed, though, it's very frantic, very fast-paced, to the point that certain details are spouted out by some characters, but you don't really have time to fully digest the situation. You don't really know the significance of, say, certain characters coming into possession of certain information. You know that something important is going down, but you really don't understand why it's important. It's just that there's so many reasons being thrown around that it's done at such a chaotic, fast pace that there were times where I had to rewind the movie just to kind of see if I could make sense of what was going on in terms of the plot. But honestly, it was hard to follow for me. I mean, I eventually got the gist of it, but it's just that the way it was developed, it was very roughshod and amateur, at least in my opinion. Because you have some very interesting ideas within the movie. I mean, for one thing, you have the economic conflict going on between America and Japan, and they bring up the notion of the two merging, and that, while, say, for instance, isn't necessarily something that would in and of itself make for an interesting science fiction movie, it does make one wonder what the economic impact of something like that would be in real life. And so, I mean, they throw out ideas like that, but they don't really do anything with them. You also have, moments where certain characters, primarily Alex Rain, they briefly talk about the disconnect that they feel with, say, humanity and cyborgs, or at the very least, other characters are narrating these thoughts that other characters are having. And so you have some interesting moments in that regard, but then it goes right back to fast-paced chaos. To a point where you have some interesting moments, but you don't really get to fully savor and appreciate them, because once again, you have all these things going on and unfolding at such a fast pace that all you can do is hold on for dear life and hope you pick up some form of coherence along once you get to the end. It's a movie that I think, as I said towards the beginning of my review, I really think that if someone who was more skilled in terms of, say, actually, writing dialogue or directing, had gotten a hold of this movie, it could have been much better. But as it is, you just kind of get a movie where you see glimpses of a lot more interesting things than what the movie eventually turned out being. But I will say that while it was hard to keep track of what was going on, who was who, and what have you, or why certain characters were significant, I will say that for a low-budget movie, the action scenes actually do look good. When you have all these massive shootouts going on, yes, all this time is devoted to these shootouts, but the shootouts do look good. The way they're shot, the way they're staged, the way the actors are, handling the choreography and everything. That stuff actually looks good. I mean, over the top maybe. Like there's a lot of double machine gun firing, or guns akimbo, I think, is what it's called, or just bullets going everywhere. And I mean, if you wanted to nitpick, I mean, you could question as to why so many characters are having a hard time, hitting one or two targets. But oddly enough, Albert Pyun actually addressed this in one of the behind-the-scenes features, because he's been asked that over the years, and his line of thinking was, at this point in time, with the escalation and conflict between humans and cyborgs and terrorism in general, both sides are kind of having to up the ante in terms of like what kind of weapons they have. And so oftentimes the weapons that they have, while powerful, tend to be difficult to maintain in terms of accuracy. That's, in his mind, that's why you have so many action scenes where it seems like the bullets kind of go everywhere, and not just towards the targets. So I mean, I thought that was an interesting explanation. I don't know if it's going to say, make it to where, nitpickers are going to be like, oh, okay, no biggie. But at the same time, the explanation was there, albeit behind the scenes. So yeah, I mean, action-wise, I mean, the movie, looks good, and has some exciting moments when all that's happening. And also, even though there's like a reduced budget with this movie, the special effects, for the most part, when it comes to, say, depicting, say, parts of cyborg anatomy or something like that, the special effects are actually pretty good. There'll be instances where characters are shot, and this one character, for example, gets shot in the throat and gets blown backwards into a glass shower door, and so he's in the tub, choking on what's left of his life. But but then you see like where his throat used to be, and it's just like a bunch of machinery caked by this burnt flesh. And it was actually a pretty cool, special effects moment, because I mean, you see a guy choking and struggling for life, and then at the same time you see this weird machinery surrounded by organics sort of just protruding from his throat. And so the people that did the makeup and special effects for this movie actually did a pretty good job. And I think one of the moments for me that was another highlight was when this one character is trying to get a tracking device out of Alex Rain's eye. And basically what ends up happening is just like she uses a couple of tools to get his eye to sort of protrude out. And so you see his eyeball with all this machinery, this sort of machine rod that's sort of pushing the eyeball out, that's coming from Alex's head. And in that way, this other character, she can remove the tracking device. But I mean, that was a really cool moment in terms of special effects, especially for the reduced budget that this movie had. So yeah, it's like when it came to like machinery that the cyborgs had that were a part of their bodies, like say when some certain characters got shot and you see machine parts and wires coming out. I mean, that stuff actually looked pretty cool. And there was even a moment or two that was actually kind of startling. Like you see this one character, his face kind of just splits like this, and this part comes out, and you see his gun pop out, where the guy's eye was, and it's like, you don't expect to see something like that. And I guess partially also because of the first time you see it, and it's in like a sort of hazy, dimly lit area, and then you see that happen, and it's all the more startling. So I got to give the movie credit in terms of the action scenes and the makeup and special effects. And as a lot of other people have pointed out, in terms of people who have seen the movie and or reviewed it, in one of the action scenes, there's a moment where Alex Rain actually shoots his way out of a hotel room where he's got enemies coming at him from multiple sides. And so he takes these machine guns and literally shoots out the floor beneath him. And he goes through one floor and then, through multiple other floors. I think it's like 5 or 6 floors. And and once he gets down to the ground, I mean, he looks up and you see like all the holes they shot through. And it's one of those kind of, remember the bathtub scene from Breaking Bad? The acid bath scene. And after that happens and you see, Jesse and Walt looking up through where the bathtub fell down. And except, imagine that, but imagine if it had fallen through 6 floors. And, that's the kind of moment that, Alex has when he looks up through the floors he just fell through. And that was actually a really cool scene, simply because of how inventive it was. And also, you fast forward several years later to, when they came out with the first Underworld movie. It was Kate Beckinsale. She was the main actress in that, but she does something very similar. But I think she only shot through 1 or 2 floors, and if I remember correctly, it was CGI. So this, while Underworld was definitely a better movie, the way they did the shooting through the floor bit in Nemesis was much better because, one, it's all practical effects, no CGI. 2, it's through at least 6 floors. So I gotta say, I mean, I gotta give Nemesis credit for, say, the action scenes and the makeup and special effects. I mean, because it's very impressive with how cool they make the special effects and the action scenes look, in spite of the film's low budget. I'm getting excited about that. But I guess it just goes to show you that why I once again would call Nemesis a fascinating failure, because I mean, it looks cool, and it's got good action scenes and makeup and special effects, but at the same time, the writing and acting, and just the way they develop the plot, to be honest, it sucks. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, you have some good actors in this movie, but they're having to work with a script that is really not that good. Like, there are some interesting ideas with the script, but the script itself is not good. But anyway, though, so speaking of acting, okay, so the actor / martial artist, Olivier Gruner, I think that's how you say his name. He plays Alex Rain, and on one hand, he definitely looks cool playing him. Like when it comes to, say, action scenes and what have you, he's a martial artist, but he doesn't get to make a whole lot of use of his martial arts abilities in this movie. But it's more gunplay than anything. But he does look cool shooting guns. I gotta say that for him. But when it comes to acting, though, I really think that it would have helped especially if he's the top billed actor in the movie, if he'd had some form, I don't know if he had, say, dialogue coaches, behind the scenes or anything like that, but I really think it would have helped if he had worked on his English. I mean, this isn't a mark against him as a person, but just in terms of, you watch the movie, and frankly, at times, it is difficult to understand what he's saying. But, I mean, he does look cool in the action scenes, but at the same time, you're like, I wish I could understand what you were saying, pal. Oddly enough, they were wanting to get, according to the behind-the-scenes features, they were wanting to get Jean-Claude Van Damme for the part initially, but they couldn't afford it, I believe was the reason. Olivier Gruner, who had been in a martial arts film prior to this one, it was called Angel Town. I never saw it, but based on that, the people who made Nemesis were like, hey, let's, throw this guy in here. And oddly enough, they have a martial artist who doesn't really get to do any martial arts. But like I said, he looks good shooting guns at the bad guys. So I don't know, like, either if they'd had him do less dialogue, or maybe practice speaking in English a little more. I think he probably would come across better as a character. But incidentally, I saw a little bit of an interview that he was doing with, I think it was Scott Adkins, another actor slash martial artist, and Olivier Gruner in this interview, which was more recent, was speaking very good English. So I'm guessing just at the time that this movie was made, his handling of English was not that good. So I guess, just goes to show you, time and experience, but so yeah, so that was Olivier Gruner's, part. But yeah, like there was some familiar faces, like say Tim Thomerson, the guy who played Jack Death in Trancers. It's one of my favorite B movies. It was really interesting seeing him as the main bad guy in this movie, because Commissioner Farnsworth, it turns out to be a guy who has a lot of things up his sleeve. And he comes across as a good guy at first, like something that you'd expect, an actor like Tim Thomerson to play. But then, when certain revelations kind of come to light about the mission as well as Farnsworth himself, he becomes a bad guy. And I don't think it's, spoiling things too much to, say that he's involved with the cyborgs. And so I'm not going to say, it was like top-notch acting, but it was interesting seeing Tim Thomerson, the guy who's, known for, in B movies at least, playing square-jawed, wisecracking heroes, to be playing a bad guy. And also, let's see, you have Cary-Hiroyuki Tagu. I really hope I'm saying the man's name right. He was the actor who played Shang Tsung in the first Mortal Kombat movie, but he plays one of the human characters, and he was like the head of what was purportedly a terrorist group that the humans had, but it turns out that this terrorist group was wanting to help humans. They weren't just wanting to commit mindless mayhem, like they're wanting to help the humans against the cyborgs. But it was interesting seeing him in the part, because first thing I think of when I see him is Shang Tsung, and so it was interesting seeing him as kind of a good guy. It's just, kind of like with Tim Thomerson, the acting's not exactly top notch on his part, but at the very least, he's, decent enough, to where he's able to make, work with the material that he has and come out being one of the better looking actors in the movie. But you also have Yuji Okumoto, who, some people might remember from Karate Kid 2 and as of late Cobra Kai. He doesn't have a really big part, but it is interesting seeing him in here. And that's another thing. Like you see a lot of familiar faces, but they have very small roles. Like you have Deborah Shelton, who was in a bunch of soap operas back in the day. She plays a cyborg named Julian, and that's another thing. A lot of the names in this movie, like say they're either masculine, but they're given to women, or they're feminine and they're given to men. And so, Julian was played by Deborah Shelton, and she was kind of depending on your perspective, she was either, a terrorist, or she was, a fellow operative that was going up against the cyborgs, even though she was a cyborg, kind of like Alex. But it was interesting seeing her in the role, except, she is only in the movie for a few minutes, and you get to see her in her natural state, and she looks very good. Also with her in the same scene, in his natural state, is Thomas Jane, aka the Punisher. This was like one of his first movies, and he's only in the movie for a few minutes, but you also have, Jackie Earle Haley, who, jumps in at the very end of the movie for just a couple of minutes. Jackie Earle Haley is the guy who played Rorschach in Watchmen. So you have like a bunch of actors in here that, have definitely gone to bigger and better things, or at least were in better things, that only show up for a few minutes here and there. And the majority of screen time is given to, say, actors who are more, say, known within the B community. But I did see another familiar face, and that was the character of Jared, played by Marjorie Monaghan, I think is how you say her name. I remember her from one of the seasons of Babylon 5. She was like a operative on Mars, she was like, one of the heads of this insurgent group going up against EarthGov, which were the bad guys. But anyway, though, I saw her, and I was like, yeah, I recognize her. But I thought her character was interesting, because, in the sense that the character, definitely had some backstory with Alex, and you get some dialogue here and there that shows that, the two of them have a history. And some of the lines that she has about, the war between humans and cyborgs. I mean, they make you, the way she talks about things in the brief amount of time she's in the movie, it hints at a far more interesting world than the movie actually is. The world that the movie is in, I think, is more interesting than the actual movie. I mean, the hints and scraps of info that you get from characters like her. And that's another thing. It's like the people who made the movie, they ripped off things like, RoboCop, Terminator, Escape from New York, and then, of course, you throw in, the notion of maybe someone having read some William Gibson novels. He was like one of the guys who started the whole cyberpunk genre. But it's like if someone had read Neuromancer, but only a few of the pages, and remembered some of the slang terminology, and kind of, watched the aforementioned movies that Nemesis was ripping off, and then threw it all together, and that's kind of what you get with Nemesis. And so, considering that they're ripping off and or borrowing from all these sources, I mean, I guess it stands to reason that you would eventually get some cool things that pop up within the movie. But when you borrow from so many sources, or I should say, rip off so many sources, and you rush things in such a way to where the whole movie comes across as chaotic, if interesting, that's when you get something that is ultimately kind of amateurish, I guess. Moments of entertainment, especially when it comes to the action scenes, but when the action's not going on, the movie just really flounders. Let's see, there was a character named Max Impact. She was played by a woman named Merle Kennedy, who, I mean, she looks good in a bikini, but at least at the time of Nemesis goes, she couldn't act, and unfortunately, she gets like a lot of the screen time when she pairs up with Olivier Gruner later on in the movie, and also. And there was another actor in the movie who was a familiar face, Brion James. He's been in movies like Blade Runner, what have you. He was a very good actor, but he plays one of the bad guys. But you also have him working with a script that honestly isn't that good, and so I guess maybe to make his character more lively, he speaks with a very bad German accent, and so that's the thing. It's like you have these actors who are stuck with a script that isn't that good, and either they themselves aren't that good as well in terms of acting, or they're actually good actors doing what they can with the material, and so you have this movie that is just kind of an oddity. And as I said at the beginning of the review, it's what I would call a fascinating failure. But I mean, there was a moment or two that I kind of liked, in terms of, say, getting into the mindset of a character, like when Alex is talking about why he's taking these drugs, and which is for the pain because of, say, all the machinery that's in his body, or Jared, in, say, like a narration, is talking about how Alex wishes that he could explain to someone he just killed why their insults got to him or something like that. And the thing is, it's like, because he doesn't really know if he's human or machine anymore. I mean, you get moments like that, that if this had been a better movie, we would have really gotten into the psychology of the character, but instead you just have, like, say, an idea, that could have been interesting, but they don't really do much with it. Or when we get to a supposed payoff of that, it's like all this chaos has happened on screen, and when we get to a moment where, say, Alex is crying, and when he's not supposed to be able to cry, that's supposed to be, the moment where he realizes he's still human after all. But the problem is, because of how amateurish the acting is, we don't really buy the emotion of, what's going on there. And whereas if we'd been invested in this character the whole way, then that moment might have, resonated a lot more. But as it is, it's more like, okay, we're just stuck with, a bunch of characters that honestly aren't that memorable because the dialogue was pretty lousy, and and things were unfolding at such a pace to where we didn't really get to, say, click with any of the characters. So yeah, I mean, that's I guess just my take on it. I will say though that watching the special features on here, like the making of stuff, I'm not gonna say I gained an appreciation for the movie, but I did find it more fascinating finding out what they originally wanted to do. On the special features here, you got commentaries by the director, and you also have a DVD that has the director's cut and the Japanese cut. Now, I haven't watched the Japanese cut yet, but the director's cut, it's really not anything special. In fact, the director's cut, I would say in some ways is worse than the theatrical cut. I mean, it's the same movie, with the exception of some oddly inserted CGI scenes of cars flying by, which, I mean, might have been neat if the CGI hadn't been so, subpar in quality. And that's the thing. I mean, when you got CGI that looks worse than special effects from the early 90s, I mean, they should have been like, hey, let's just scrap this. It's not worth it, as far as trying to put something like that in the movie. And with the exception of, say, like a dialogue change at the end, the director's cut's not any different from the theatrical cut. I'm not really sure what the story is with the Japanese cut. I think someone had said that the Japanese cut was like a grainy VHS quality that has Japanese subtitles burned into the footage. But to the special features were from their interviews that are conducted with the director Albert Pyun and one of the movie's producers, and it was interesting getting their take on things. And amongst other things, if you watch the special features, you learned that Albert Pyun had originally wanted the character of Alex Rain to not only be a girl, but a teenage girl. But the people who were investing in the movie, or investing in handling finances with the movie, they're kind of like, no, we want a male lead for the movie. And they basically said, hey, if you have a male lead for the movie, we'll back off and let you do what you want. But how much they backed off and how much he got to do what he wanted, that's up for debate. But that's how Alex went from being a teenage girl to full-grown man. But as it turns out, Albert Pyun would do 3 other sequels to this movie, in which the main character was a female, and she was played by a martial artist. I think her name was Sue Price. I haven't seen them. I don't know if they're any good or not. I actually heard that they weren't that good. I mean, unless you're a Sue Price fan. And I think that they somewhat recently came out with another sequel. So there's been 5 of these Nemesis movies. And if I remember correctly, Albert Pyun only directed the first 4, but he produced the 5th one, because it turns out that he actually has some form of dementia, and so when it comes to directing, he can't really do it anymore, unfortunately. Which, I mean, say what you will about him as a director, but I mean, having dementia, it's a sad thing. And when you're someone who has a vision that you're trying to get on screen, and you can't really do it because you got dementia, I mean, that's pretty sad. But I think that's why he produced the last Nemesis movie instead of directing like he did the others. But all that being said, I mean, it was definitely interesting, watching the special features and finding out more about the movie and what have you. And another nice little tidbit I thought was pretty cool was okay. So in the scene where Deborah Shelton's character, or when Deborah Shelton is completely nude on screen, I mean, it's only for a few seconds, right? And the scene she has with Thomas Jane is very steamy, in spite of how brief it is. But it's like, damn. So we went from sci-fi action to, whoa, this is kind of pornographic. This is pornographic, But anyway, though, in the scene in question, so Deborah Shelton, she's naked. But when Thomas Jane found out that she was going to be naked in the scene, originally his character was supposed to be clothed. I don't know if it was fully clothed or just like have some boxers on or something. But he's like, no, if she's going to be naked, I'm going to be naked too. And so I thought that was, a nice little bit of solidarity, on his part. So basically it was like, he was trying to say, hey, if I got your back, kid. Except, she was older than him, But I thought that was a nice little bit of a nice gesture of solidarity on his part. Plus, I mean, lucky guy, he got to be with a, beautiful woman in her natural state. So, yeah. I thought that was a, kind of an amusing but, cool behind the scenes tidbit I found out there. And like I said, a nice little show of solidarity. So that way, the guys can't be all, creepy over Deborah Shelton and what have you. But so and I did find it interesting that so many familiar faces were in this movie, and when you hear about like how they got to be in the movie and or why they were in it, I mean, the behind the scenes info you find out about it tends to be more interesting than the characters that they played. And so I always thought that's, when something like that happens, I always thought that, that was, an interesting experience in terms of, learning about the movie and what have you. But yeah, it was a movie that in and of itself, it's a disappointment, but at the same time, if you're a B-movie aficionado, I mean, it's worth checking out for sure. I mean, I would say at the very least, stream it or rent it. But if you're a fan of the movie, then the MVD Blu-ray release is definitely the way to go. But I'm going to go ahead and give Nemesis 2 out of 5 stars. It was okay. Like I said earlier, I like to think that, in someone else's more capable hands, it would have been a much better movie. But as it is, it's just a ho-hum movie that has, some moments of liveliness. But that was my take on Nemesis. I hope, I hope that you like what you see here. And if you do, please like and subscribe. And you got any questions, comments, drop a line, let me know. And y'all have a good day. Bye.